every one of us has a skill, and we tend to do the same kind of service, whether it's pen testing or policy writing or risk assessment, or CMMC assessment. We owe it to the community to do things like your podcast or the training that you do or the books that I write to give back. Don't be afraid to get out there and say, this is how I do it. Even in a LinkedIn post, you are going to get corrected if it's wrong, but do you want to keep doing it wrong?
Welcome to the CMMC Proof Podcast. I'm your host, Derrich Phillips, a certified CMMC assessor. You all are in for a real treat today because we have Doug Landoll joining us. He is the CEO of Lantego, and he is a cybersecurity expert. Been doing this for quite some time, has a really impressive resume. So I'm going to let him tell you all a little bit about his background. So welcome, Doug.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Derrich.
How are you today?
I'm doing great, and I've been looking forward to this discussion because I think cybersecurity community is very open to sharing. And we kind of need to be, right? It's through podcasts like yours and books like mine and others, a lot of that we're doing this.
Yeah, certainly a very collaborative environment. And just everyone, most people I've encountered have been very giving and transparent, willing to help others out. So we're in a great industry, certainly. So Doug, can you tell us how you got started in cybersecurity?
I got started in cybersecurity back in the late 80s. We didn't call it cyber. We called it information security. But even before
it was
that,
sexy.
Yeah, right? It doesn't sound but we didn't even know it was there. I was in college. I loved computers. I hated programming, but I got a computer science degree anyway. Spent about a year programming at the NSA and came across a job description in their classified job listings that explained trusted product evaluations. And I was hooked. Just the fact that you could go in and work with people who had been at these companies like IBM or Apple and created operating systems and interview them and assess their ability to create something that could withstand attacks from unauthorized people. Yeah, I was just hooked from then, and I've always been on the check it side. I think people in our industry are either builders or breakers. I'm a breaker side, but I'm on the assessment area of that.
Okay. So back in the 80s, long before the cybersecurity term was coined. I got started in the Army in early 2000, and it was back then, it was telecommunications, data encryption.
Right? We've grown into our own field, which is just amazing.
Absolutely. Before we dive into, especially talking about your books, I'm really excited to talk about those. What do you do outside of cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think a lot of us sit at our desks in cybersecurity, and it's a lot of research and typing and sitting down and thinking. And I like to do something completely different. I like to play guitar. It's more creative. There is a whole lot of mathematics and structure in there, and I appreciate that. But I like the aspect where I just love music, and I can better appreciate a song by trying to play with it. I'm not real good, but I just love the learning process and just the feeling I get when I'm trying to learn something new that's completely different from this academic intellectual stuff.
Yeah, that's what makes hobbies fun. You don't have to be good at it. You can just enjoy it. For a while, I had gotten to doing endurance sports like marathons and triathlon. I wasn't good at it at all, but I enjoyed it. Just being out there and training, just crossing the finish line.
Certainly something different.
Exactly. I think to your point, we have to be intentional as cybersecurity professionals to step away from our computers, get outdoors, do something active. Absolutely.
I'd like to take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, CMMC Proof Compliance Acceleration System.
Are you feeling overwhelmed by the complex world of CMMC compliance? You're not alone. Small to mid-sized defense contractors are often swamped by the massive list of requirements, unsure of where to begin, lacking resources, and fearing assessment failure. But there's a solution. CMMC Proof, your compliance acceleration system. Unlike typical GRC tools, CMMC Proof breaks down the process into 5 easy-to-follow phases, guiding you through each step of your compliance journey. With everything you need in one place, from CMMC Level 1 and 2 requirements to evidence tracking and more, you'll never feel lost again. Get CMMC compliant faster and easier than ever before. Our system ensures nothing is missed, saving you time and effort. Built by CMMC certified assessors with decades of experience, CMMC Proof delivers real-world expertise and guidance you can trust. By the time your assessment comes, you won't just be ready, you'll be confident. Visit CMMCproof.com to start your 7-day free trial and accelerate your CMMC compliance today.
So I know that you're an author. We're certainly going to talk about CMMC, but tell us about your books that you've written over.
Yeah, it started with just writing white papers to explain things. It started off with security risk assessments. I had a team of people and we were performing these as a group. And one time I had to not be there and they kept calling me for instructions. And I was thinking like, guys, we've done this all together before. And I didn't realize how much they were leaning on maybe some stuff that I wasn't telling them. If you look at the physical security of a building as you're walking up to it, you're checking out the fence line and the camera placement and the door strength and things like that. If you find something wrong, maybe there's a light out on the corner that hasn't been reported in a while. You, as a member of my team, know that one. You don't know the 20 things I looked at that were okay. And that's what was missing. So I started writing these checklists and standard approaches for assessing, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it got useful enough to put it together in a book. And I was lucky enough to be introduced to a publisher at the time and was able to take my first manuscript and get it right out into the press, which was awesome.
So what was your first book?
First book was the Security Risk Assessment Handbook. So it's in its third edition now, but it was first written in 2006. It's grown a lot and come a long way.
I think I have this, maybe the second edition that I originally had. Is that right?
That is an early edition.
Second edition. So I remember I was working at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise at the time as a risk assessor and just kind of trying to find out what was out there to help me educate myself on doing comprehensive risk assessments. I came across your book. I was really impressed by how comprehensive it is. Certainly, risk assessments are not all created equal. A lot of people just call it a risk assessment. And so I'm sure to your standard, it wouldn't really be a risk assessment. But you definitely just comprehensive, walk you through A to Z, a comprehensive risk assessment. You're kind enough to send me your latest one.
There you go.
Me. I appreciate this. Working my way through this one. But yeah, I'm seeing just another fantastic resource. I don't know if you remember, but this was probably 2017, maybe 2018. I had opportunity to meet you in person. I was in Austin at one of Hewlett-Packard sites. We were there for training, and I invited you out to lunch. You took me up on that offer, and we talked about your book and just gave me some good insights.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that. I love feedback. I think every one of us has a skill, and we tend to do the same kind of service, whether it's pen testing or policy writing or risk assessment, or CMMC assessment. We owe it to the community to do things like your podcast or the training that you do or the books that I write to give back. Don't be afraid to get out there and say, this is how I do it. Even in a LinkedIn post, you are going to get corrected if it's wrong, but do you want to keep doing it wrong? We as assessors expect the people we assess to have thick skin. We need to have it too, right? And,
that's a good point.
Don't be afraid to put something out there just because you think people are going to smack it down. I think we're relatively kind in smackdowns, but you'll certainly learn something. So just get that stuff out there and then correct later.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've noticed some corrections I receive, whether directly in comments or direct message. And oftentimes I notice it's really just how you're kind of presenting it or wording it, where it may be just misunderstood how it's coming across. And it can be maybe just tweaking a word or two where it makes the message more clear.
There you go.
Yeah, but like I said, that feedback is very important and valuable.
Yeah, I think you'll even find that they'll point out areas that you need to expand that you thought were simple, but they're hung up on.
Exactly. Translation to plain English, and going back to your inspiration behind getting into writing books and checklists. You mentioned your team, where there were things that you didn't write down that you could maybe assume that people knew, or your team members knew.
Right.
Yeah, the unwritten or the unspoken. That. So in a wonderful world, which brings us to CMMC 2.0. Curious, how did CMMC first get on your radar?
It snuck up on me. I had been doing mostly other regulations like HIPAA, PCI, GDPR. I would be doing NIST 853 or even 171 assessments here and there, but the CMMC 1.0 snuck up on me. People started talking about it. I hadn't heard of it. I looked at it, and the contents of it were completely unfamiliar to me. Like I don't know if people remember 1.0, but it's interesting to look at. They snuck in a bunch of requirements that were not in 853 or 171. I think they were pet projects of the people who put it together. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out where did these come from. I don't have a problem with a lot of the requirements. They're goodness, but they weren't. I couldn't see the etymology of the requirement. It was just like out of thin air. I was intrigued. I put together as many charts and readings and interpreted what all these regulations, DFARs, and other things were and did. Found some great resources out there, and I decided to write a book about 1.0. And 1.0 crashed and burned, and it needed to.
Oh, yeah.
It was garbage. And when 2.0 came out, I said, okay, am I going to dust off this manuscript and follow the 2.0? The first thing I did, Derrich, is I looked to see, okay, what's out there? And the answer was zero. There was like one pamphlet pamphlet kind of book. You can still see it on the internet. It was about $18, but it was just a verbatim of the government reg. And then there was another kind of real salesy thing. So I made the decision, since there was really nothing out there that was what I was looking for, I thought I would create it. That's why I wrote the assessment handbook, just to a place to put all my charts and analysis. But I thought, if I'm confused and want information and can't find it, there must be others. So let's create what you want.
Definitely. So with the 1.0, mentioned the manuscript, did you actually publish that book?
I didn't. I created covers. I edited it. It was kind of ready, but I just wasn't pleased. And I think it was just because of the subject matter. Like 1.0 is, it's hard for me to defend that thing. I don't care for it.
All right. So with the 2.0, I know you published that book. Can you tell us more about it?
I did. Yeah. 2.0 removed all the, I'm just going to call it garbage, removed all the shadow regulations that you couldn't find a government reg requiring it. Let's be honest about it. CMMC 2.0 is 800-171 with a couple more requirements, right? I do understand that. And it basically says you can no longer self-assess. So CMMC 2.0 is mostly that, hey, certain levels you can't self-assess. I don't find a tremendous amount new here. I could take off the cover of CMMC 2.0 and put 800-171. With about a half an hour of editing, I could turn it into an 800-171. It's rather close. There are some distinct things you'd have to change, but man, 98% of it is about the same. But I still don't think there was anything out there to help us understand it. There's some great resources so you can get, like, these are the actual requirements. And the Cyber AB puts out some things which are hard to read and I think hard to defend. But yeah, I kind of wanted a practitioner's guide to this whole thing. And that's what's in there, I think.
So the title of the book is the CMMC 2.0 Assessment Handbook. Elaborate more when we say a practitioner's guide. Like, what really distinguishes this book from other materials that's out there?
If you are involved in a project, even if you're just considering, does my company need to be CMMC compliant? What's that mean? It's a great book. Start off at the beginning. If you're confused with the DFARS and the NIST and all the different regulations that are out there, it will lay it out, right? Because reading those things in their native form is difficult.
To say the least.
Yeah. And reading a lot of people's posts, they'll just refer to them by their nicknames and they'll kind of gloss over it real fast. And you're like, whoa, can you give me the slow down version? It's in the beginning of the book, so you'll feel up to speed. And then secondly, it lets you know about, is this right for my company? Do I really need to be CMMC compliant? And if so, what do I do about it? How do I defining my boundaries, selecting my level, identifying my assets, preparing for an assessment? And that's what's in there. Is you can take this book and you can prep yourself for an assessment. It has every one of the requirements. It has practitioner level discussion of, like, this is what you need to do, together with, here's a bunch of options, here's an example of it, here's some gotchas, and I'm just adding now, here are some things the assessors might look for in terms of artifacts or workflow process. Constantly, this is my first technical self-published book. It had to be self-published because the publishing process takes about 6 to 8 months from final manuscript to getting it on the shelves. And by that time, your CMMC update is old. When the proposed rule came out, which was a giant leap because it had level 3 in it, finally defined, I got out available on Amazon within 6 weeks of the proposed rule. I got the update out. And the chapter on level 3 was substantial writing. But, you can finish it and get it up on Amazon within hours.
That's the beauty of self-publishing. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's fast. Lots of corrections and updates as I read what other people say and maybe questions I get. I am currently working on my 37th version. I'll republish it every once in a while, but
it's a moving target.
It is a moving target. It's always getting updated and corrected.
Or to get I certainly order a copy and have it as a resource. Another resource. It's great. So would you say that the CMMC handbook and your risk assessment handbook, do they complement each other?
In a way, the security risk assessment handbook, number one, there is a difference between gap assessment, which is what the CMMC is, and a risk assessment. Just laying it out there real simply. A gap assessment is reviewing a system against a standard or regulation, a set of requirements. requirements. That's what we're doing in CMMC. There's a set of requirements. You have to meet every one of them. If I assess you against them and you're missing 8, doesn't matter which one of those you tackle first. You have to correct all 8. You have to be compliant with it. So doing a risk assessment on those remaining gaps would be a waste of money. You don't need them in order. You don't need them the impact. The impact is until you do all of them, you're non-compliant. The risk assessment goes further in terms of what's the likelihood that this threat will actually, result in an impact, and how big would that impact be? Therefore, what's my prioritization? Other than the major difference between a risk and a gap assessment, I think they're complementary in terms of how do you gather data, how do you analyze it, how do you interpret requirements, and even how do you work as a team tackling a system and collecting evidence from different sides and then putting it all together. There's a lot of stuff in there about that I didn't repeat in the CMMC assessment handbook. Okay,
so going back to what was your initial reaction when you first read the 2.0 proposed rule? Surprises?
The 2.0 was like awesome. They got rid of, like I said, the shadow requirements. It really is a reflection of 800-171. I thought that was great. And I was like, okay, this I can get behind. I was having a real problem with 1.0 because it's like, I don't even know if I want to write a book about it because I just didn't like it. This one makes sense. A ton of people need it. So I was real pleased with 2.0. Not real pleased with the CAP, the assessment process. You can go check out my video. It's about an hour long. I think it's kind of garbage. If you're going to assess something, probably every single person who is a certified assessor could write down their process and it would be better than the CAP. The CAP has some problems with evidence tracking. They have some problems with telling people how to do business. A lot of weird stuff in there. The problem I have is like, okay, that was out like a year ago and they got a ton of comments. Can you tell me what the revision looks like? Oh, that's right. It hasn't been revised in a year. What is going on that you can't take a rather simplistic process? I mean, it's not easy, but we've been assessing systems against 800-171 and the like for a long time. We've used our own processes for doing that before CMMC was there. Can you write down something? Once you do it and get comments, can you fix it? I've got little confidence in that document. That's one of my problems with CMMC is the cyber AB and some of the stuff about the ecosystem I just don't agree with.
Hopefully it gets some updates and revisions. Take into consideration the comments to be determined. A note with the proposed rules, we got a lot of chatter in the CMMC ecosystem is around security protection data, how the DoD is going to treat that, and also with the Fed around moderate and equivalent. Well, I know that was in the memo. What are your thoughts around those hot topics?
I'm writing the book for companies that need to be CMMC compliant. And at the end of the day, a lot of that stuff doesn't matter. For example, you as an assessor, you need to determine what's sufficient and adequate evidence that I have a control in place. And there's a whole lot of chatter about that. Like how many, I don't know, how many emails of someone creating an account do I need to look at to say it's sufficient evidence? What I tell my clients who are preparing for the assessors, I don't care. Like if you have a process for authorizing a user and a process for creating an account that meets that authorization, when the assessor comes in, if he wants to see one email that backs that up or 20, who cares? That's their problem. That's their process. And it doesn't affect my client at all. If you need to see my policy or you don't, what I'm telling my clients is you need to have policy, you need to have process, and you need to do it. And if you do the process, you're going to have whatever evidence they want to see. So it's interesting to me that there's a lot of discussion about the evidence that's needed, but I find it of little importance to the organizations being assessed.
That makes sense. Now, as far as what do you predict the impact is going to be once CMMC is a final rule? Do you foresee it being disruptive as all of
I mean, the thing that's coming to the head is CMMC is real. It will be
going away.
It's coming, and it will impact RFPs and proposals and contracts. And there's, hundreds of thousands of organizations that will be impacted. What we're seeing is not a lot of them are moving towards assessment yet. And I think all the organizations that perform assessments can see this coming, and they're a bit, I would say, panicking, but panicking on behalf of the DIB, not on behalf of themselves. They're saying, guys, there's not enough of us to go around. How come you're not engaging us more? So there's going to be a bottleneck when they finally decide it's important to them. I think it's going to be interesting to see what does the federal government do. They don't want there to be a bottleneck. They want to have a hard deadline. I'm just wondering, when do the exemptions come out? And when do they say, we understand you shouldn't have been caught flat-footed, but you are. And we don't have enough people in the DIB who have gone through the assessment. Be curious what they're doing. In the meantime, for holy smokes, I mean, if you're in the DIB, you should at least have self-assessed yourself by now and be working towards getting full compliance and being ready to get assessed. I mean, why not go ahead and assess it? Your architecture isn't changing. You know what you got. And if it's missing something, let's fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. Now, I know you've worked with a lot of different frameworks, and especially ones that require independent audits or verification, like ISO 27001 or SOC 2. What are your thoughts on how CMMC compares to those?
The interesting thing, Derrich, is going to be how the assessors, and that's you, right? You're one of these assessors. When I did Orange Book evaluations, we had a technical review board, and whenever we as assessors had to interpret something, we would state our case. Here's the requirement. Here's one way to interpret it and why you might want to. Here's the other one and why you might want to. This is my recommendation. They would make a determination and the interpretation would be published. What I'm finding now is the assessors kind of have that discussion amongst themselves, but it's not public, which I think is wrong. If you are interpreting a requirement by the DoD, you need to put it out there. Examples of interpretations include, do you need to document something? If there's a requirement that says you must have a process to do something, does that mean it needs to be documented? It doesn't say you do, but if you have a process, most of us would say you don't have a process unless it's written down. But that's an interpret. Let's spell it out. Let's state what's there. And I've seen posts on LinkedIn or podcasts or other things from different assessors, and some of them are a little bit more, I'll say, implementing scope creep, right? When they say, when I review this, I expect to see, which means when they're on site and they don't see it, they ask the organization for that piece of documentation, and now it becomes a requirement because your assessor is asking for it. I think we need to be real careful as assessors of saying, hey, if you have this, I'd like to see it, but it's not required, as opposed to just saying, I want to see this. Because you got to remember, when you, as the assessor, ask for something, we want to give it to you because we want to pass. And be careful not to create requirements that weren't there in the first place. So I think one of the biggest dangers is requirement creep, where it becomes the practice of a small subset of assessors to ask for something or to interpret a certain way, and then the organizations themselves will pick up on that and it becomes a new requirement. And that's a danger. We don't want to do that. We shouldn't do that. And any interpretations or discussions that are being done, we need to come out and be transparent about that. Put that stuff out there. The other thing I think is really interesting is if your group of assessors decides, yes, this is the way we all are going to interpret that, is there someone who approves that interpretation? Is it the Cyber AB? Is it the DoD? The answer is it should be the DoD. But if it's not, now you're becoming your own rulemaking authority, and you don't want to do that either. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see. Once we start getting lots of assessments, I'm very interested in how these regulations or these requirements are getting interpreted.
That's a really good perspective, because I know there's like the C3PO forum that's kind of like run by other C3POs, and it's informal, and certainly at the most the Cyber AB maybe provides some feedback, but I'm not sure the DoD is, at least at this point, not providing any official feedback. So
and it affects behavior, right?
Absolutely. So we want to tread lightly in that area. Now, as far as, do you anticipate at any point there will be any reciprocity with the other, like a SOC 2 or ISO 27001?
No. It's an interesting discussion, but I say just a flat no. I think it will always be discussed, but you can't, there are roadmaps between these two requirement set. Just because you point to a requirement saying this is similar, it doesn't make it the same. It doesn't make the interpretation process the same. The certification process is different. So it's just a flat no.
I agree. And I had listened to a podcast that Dr. Ron Ross was on, NIST, and he pretty much said it as well. Like they evaluated it, explored it, and just too different.
Yeah, I think so.
And I've recently been helping clients through SOC 2 and ISO 27001 and been through several of those audits recently. It's not a comparison, really. It's so many differences.
That's another interesting thing, Derrich, is like if I've gone through an ISO certification, which is extremely process heavy, right? I'm going to have my whole ISMS. I'm going to have a written process and workflow and Racky charts for everything. And if you as a CMMC assessor come in after that, you are going to get all the documentation you want. When you go see your next client, are you going to ding them for not having it? You know, do you get used to, hey, this is what my organizations give me? And I think you need to keep going back to requirements and say, no, the line is here, not what I've seen out in the wild, but what is in the requirements.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on FedRAMP moderate equivalency? That memo that the DoD put out, or kind of defining what they're looking for in
I think it makes sense. I think FedRAMP moderate is harder, and it does come from the same base set of requirements. Yeah, I think that one's fine. It's not a mapping that's a guess or an interim. It's nearly the same stuff. I think that one actually makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. In some aspects, it's harder. They're not supposed to have any POAMs.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
I know that you're one of the premier CISSP instructors in the world. Pretty accurate. Tell us about just some of your CISSP training and how long you've been doing it.
Yeah, I started training CISSP in 2001, and I just fell into an opportunity to train it professionally after I started my first company. Was able to train IBM worldwide. They all came to Austin. Crazy. Dell, a couple universities, and created and started the program over at one of the largest IT trainers in the world. I've had the ability to train this class. It's a 5-day class, 235 times now. That's a lot.
Wow.
Over 20 years, right? And it's only because, the CISSP has been around that long and is a coveted certification that you're able to make a business out of doing that.
Gold standard. Yeah.
And I can even make a business out of it being a gray market trainer. I do not care for the official training. I think it has too many guide rails on it telling me how to teach or what I have to say. I would rather be more useful to my students and be able to go a little deeper. So I am pleased to have been able to make a living out of teaching that course over the last 20 years as part of the things that I do.
235 times.
That's a lot,
impressive,
man, right?
Wow.
I once told someone I could probably teach it without slides. I could probably just all right, first slide said.
Yeah, I taught CISSP, the official course, once, and by the end of the week, I was just spent. I don't want to do that again. It's tough.
They have some fantastic trainers in there, but you don't have to be a fantastic trainer to teach it. You do have to side-by-side teach and you ethics and training and all that, and you're a CISSP. But some people are more engaging than others. Some are more interesting than others. Some are more practiced at it than others. I like to say in my course, why would you take a chance on 40 hours of your professional career having someone read a slide to you? You don't want it.
That'd be painful.
Yeah.
Indeed. Are you going to bless the CMMC ecosystem and teach some CMMC courses?
I don't know. The CMMC course training seems to be, it's kind of locked. There is a curriculum that you have to teach. There's an exam you have to pass. And I think one of my biggest complaints is why can't I just sit for the exam? I mean, to be a certified professional in the CMMC ecosystem, which I am not, I have to sit for the exam. Great, get it. I have to abide by a professional code of ethics, get it. Probably have to pay a yearly fee. Okay. Why do I have to take training? I've been doing this stuff for 35 years. I wrote a book on CMMC. There's some things I'm sure I could learn in the training. We should never close ourselves off to that. But why can't I self-study? Why can't I buy the material, self-study, and do that? And until they do that, it's always a little weird taste in my mouth about the control of that and what's up with that.
Okay, got it. That makes sense. Understood. So we have the CISSP. We talked about CMMC. Along those lines, do you plan on, if they give you that option, do you plan on becoming an assessor? You could just sit for the exam?
I don't think so. If they give me the option to sit for the test, I would love to get the cert. I think I would love that to be on the front cover of my book with my name with the cert at the end of it. I would rather here be the builder. So companies need help through the assessment process. They need one set of people or a person to help them prepare for the assessment. So that's going through a self-assessment, finding your gaps, training the company on what does this all mean, and then starting to fill the gaps. We need to write a policy here. You're missing a technology there. These settings are wrong. And then going through the assessment again and saying, okay, I think we're ready. Let's go find something. I would rather do that piece. And to be honest, there's more hours in that piece. The assessment side is less interesting to me because there's somebody telling me how I need to assess. And I don't know how much impact I can have on, hey, here's some improvements to the assessment process. I guess I'm just ornery. I like to assess my own way. I don't mind it it being held up to a spotlight or a magnifying glass. But the whole reason I never became an ISO certifier. ISO certification is even worse. To be a certifier, not only do you have to be certified to do it, they even set the prices for you. This is what a certification costs and what you can charge.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Which means, like, if I'm a better assessor than someone else, I can't charge anything.
There's no incentive to
that's tough. I'm going to let that whole process work its way out. I'll be watching, but right now I'd rather write policies and workflows and get people ready for CMMC assessment than be an assessor.
Okay, so I know you had experience working with very large organizations. So for CMMC consulting, do you have a target market or industry in mind, or you're open to?
Yeah, I'm pretty open. I've helped companies as small as 4 people, and I've helped large ones as well. The difficult thing is if you're a small company, the work is not 1/100th the size. So the work is like, 60% of the work instead of 100. I like to have some templates and reference architectures and other approaches that can make it faster. I am not a believer at all at policies in a box. I think they can be very misused, but the person who's helping you get ready, they should have worked examples that they can draw from and be able to create a tailored process for you rather quickly.
Right. Certainly optimize it and start from scratch every time. Agreed. Now, what are your thoughts on, so with the authorized C3POs that CyberAB does authorize them to either perform an assessment for organization or perform consulting for organization? Do you have any thoughts about potential conflicts of interest with that?
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. I mean, it's separation of duties. You cannot objectively assess what you've helped to build. It will be interesting. Are we talking about the you is the company or the person? So if you have company A with individual B, that individual cannot help a company get ready for the CMMC assessment and also assess against it. Can individual C, who also works for the company, do so? I think right now they can, which I think still we need to question, how do they ensure objectivity? Because if that individual is to come back and say, hey, the solution that you implement is not effective in meeting this requirement, and by the way, the solution was recommended by a company I work for, do they feel that they're able to be objective without reprimands from work? That'll be interesting. The other thing that's interesting, Derrich, and I think we saw this in SOX, is there tends to be this element in organizations where they find a partner. It's like a competitor, but they cooperate with. So company 1 and company 2 both do CMMC assessments and CMMC assessment prep. If company 1 gets the prep, they'll recommend company 2. And if company 2 gets the prep, they'll recommend company 1. There's a symbiotic relationship now. And if an assessor at one of those companies is critical at the implementation that's been presented to them, does that ruin that symbiotic relationship? I totally believe that individual assessors themselves want to be objective. I'm just wondering, are we setting them up where it's difficult? I think the accounting firms did that in SOX, where one firm would just work hand in hand with another firm, and then it starts to be rubber stampish. Like, oh, here's stuff from that group. We know they're good. Be careful.
Yeah, it can be a slippery slope.
It can be.
We'll see that. So with SOX, is that something they're still working through, or is it something they found a solution?
It's still there, right? It's still working that way, I believe.
Understood. Now, have you done any FedRAMP work?
I've done some state ramp work, which is similar, but I haven't gotten into any FedRAMP work just because I just didn't have the clients. But some Texas ramp and some Arizona ramp and some other ones.
Okay. So how, to that point with how FedRAMP, how some states adopted it, TexRAMP, for example, do you foresee states, local governments, other organizations adopting CMMC?
Maybe. I would rather see states adopt 171 controls than 853, because 171 is a subset and it's much more applicable to state agencies or organizations who work for state agencies than 853 is. As far as the part of CMMC, which is the assessment process and the CyberAB and the certified people, I think they would probably put their own flavor on it. It'd be difficult to know which way they're going to go. Based on the state ramps, it's lighter, right? Like TexRAMP is not nearly as difficult as FedRAMP. The level of interps, just about none published or known of, and the level of evidence they need is much less than FedRAMP. So I think states will probably continue to be lighter than FedRAMP or lighter than CMMC. CMMC.
Good point. And then on the back end from the customer side, state agencies, that's a lot of overhead as far as managing those programs.
It really is.
They actually support that.
Well, then the interesting thing, Derrich, is like we get back to if you're an organization seeking certification, the assessment process doesn't matter. And I mean that in kind of a light way. Yes, it does matter. You have to know how to engage the people. There are certain ways in which you communicate. I get all that. But your job as the organization seeking certification is you see the requirement, put it in place. And that's kind of it. And it doesn't matter if it's for a text ramp process, which is light on evidence, or a FedRAMP process, which is heavy. It's still the same requirement. You still have to write that policy. You still have to have the procedure. You still have to train your people. And we can leave the assessment process to the assessors and only worry about the interface, which I think matters very little. It really is all about, for your organization, do you meet the requirement or not? Not, let's get on.
Yeah, good point. Do you foresee, even outside of government agencies, just within corporate America, more requirements for independent cybersecurity certifications and audits from those large enterprise customers?
Yeah, possibly. I think what we see a lot of times in regulations is a requirement for an assessment, maybe by name, like a SOX assessment or an ISO or something like that.
Yeah.
But it usually says or equivalent. It's almost always in the contract language or equivalent. So as long as you're having someone independent or objectively reviewing your controls and the people who are consuming that report believe it, it's good enough. The problem here, Derrich, is a lot of people don't read the reports. I mean, how many third-party risk programs just say, okay, what are all my suppliers and have they had a certification and what is it?
Right.
No one reads it. Just like, do we have the report? Did they supply it to us?
Check the box exercise.
Holy smokes, read that report because it says some things in there like you are responsible for this part, like ensuring only authorized people have these accounts. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, I think, and it's always going to be market driven. So to what extent do people care who the assessor was and who the cert is? I think we're going to get more exact about that. So I think it's probably coming, but boy, it's been coming for decades.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've been an entrepreneur for quite some time. What's been your secret to success in this crazy cybersecurity world?
Yeah, I think one of the secrets is define what success means to you, right? So when I was younger, success meant I want to build a team. I want to be like a VP or president of something. And I did that, right? I built a team of 12 or 15 people, created a company, sold it, ran a team of 60. And that was success to me. I enjoyed the interface I got with large companies with interesting problems. That was awesome. Success to me now is being able to, it's more of a lifestyle, being able to work when I want, with who I want, and do the projects I want. So I am not trying to float a team here. Lantego is Doug Landoll, period. It's me. So I teach classes, I do the risk assessments, I write policies, and I get enough work, people calling my phone or sending me an email without having to do marketing, without having to put a booth at a conference. To me, that's success because I don't have to spend marketing dollars and time. I can just select projects that are right in my wheelhouse. I'm very comfortable with them. I like to get challenged with stretches. I've been writing policy for 3 decades. I recently have been asked to can you write AI-based policies or how does AI influence our policies? And it's huge, right? You have to come back and you have to think about how did AI affect our acceptable use? How does it accept our incident response? How does it affect our security awareness training? And there's probably 5 or 6 documents that you should go back in and look at, hey, where do we address the AI issue? Even in software development. So I find that I can lean on my ability to write policies, but I get to stretch with new ideas like how does AI affect it? So the secret to success is first define what is success to you, and then structure everything towards it.
Love it. Great advice. Well, Doug giving us a lot of great insights and just wisdom throughout this interview. Really appreciate it. Where can the viewers find your books?
Best place is on Amazon, and really appreciate reviews, right? For any book that's out there. We got a lot of reviews on the first edition of CMMC, I think like 26 or so. And my newer edition, I only got 5. I need reviews, right? Because reviews put it up in the rankings and it gets it out there. None of us write books to get rich.
Right.
Even if it sells well.
Right.
I think I did the calculation once. It's like, I'm getting about $6 an hour to write this. Because these things take, I think the CMMC probably took me 1,000 hours to write. And the next version, I don't know, by the end of the year will probably be 1,200 hours. I'm never going to make that money back at any any rate that any cybersecurity professional would charge ever. But I love hearing from people that it was useful. That's
right.
the
Yeah. And I guess from the customer standpoint that's buying a book, just the return on investment they get for your 1,000+ hours.
Right.
They're getting it for pennies on the fractions of a penny on a dollar.
Man, if it saves you 15 minutes, like
right,
you got a bar.
it's worth it. Absolutely. Or Doug, how can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, just LinkedIn. I'm always interested in expanding my network, or Landoll at Lantego.com, and always interested in hearing from people.
Fantastic. Really appreciate your time today, Doug. You've certainly doing a great service. I continue to give back for all these years and sharing your wisdom. I can attest that. You message Doug, he'll meet you for lunch if you're local, and he's always willing to help.
I appreciate that, Derrich. Thank you.
If you receive value from this episode, I invite you to subscribe and like so that you're the first to know when we release new episodes. Also, check out CMMCproof.com to learn more about the arsenal of resources that we provide to equip you to conquer CMMC. We'll see you next time.